I want to speak about something I have come to understand better than perhaps many of my colleagues in psychology, and that is what awakening actually feels like. Not the romanticized version one encounters in spiritual literature, but the real phenomenon, the messy, terrifying, beautiful reality that I have termed individuation. I can speak from my own profound experience and from my work with countless individuals traversing this process when I say it bears no resemblance to what most people anticipate. You see, I have come to realize that awakening is not about transcending one's humanity. It is about becoming fully human. This sounds rather pleasant until one comprehends what this actually entails. It means confronting everything one has been fleeing from throughout one's entire existence. Every shadow, every projection, every unconscious pattern that has been orchestrating one's life from behind the curtain of consciousness. Allow me to share what occurred in my own life, for I believe it illuminates what I have been attempting to articulate in my work. This was during my profound confrontation with the unconscious, beginning around 1913 when I was approaching 40. I had been engaged in what I considered important psychological work for years, developing my theories, treating patients, believing myself to be quite advanced in my understanding of the psyche. But then something began to unfold that I was entirely unprepared for. It commenced with dreams, intensely vivid dreams that possessed more reality than waking consciousness itself. In these dreams, I repeatedly encountered figures, shadow beings that would pursue me or confront me in various manifestations. Initially, I attempted to dismiss them as mere nocturnal fantasies, but I had always maintained that one must pay careful attention to dreams, particularly the recurring ones. Soon, this material began infiltrating my waking existence. I would be proceeding through my day, feeling relatively composed, when suddenly I would be overwhelmed by rage, pure, undiluted fury that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Or I would find myself weeping uncontrollably over matters that appeared to warrant no such emotional response. It was as though all the feelings I had been holding at bay throughout my life were suddenly demanding acknowledgement. This is precisely what I mean when I speak of the shadow. It is not merely negative emotions or undesirable behaviors. It encompasses everything we have disowned about ourselves, everything we have relegated to the unconscious because it failed to align with our self-concept. And when genuine awakening begins, the shadow does not politely request entry, it demolishes the door entirely. I recall one particular morning, I was in my study at Küsnacht, examining myself in a mirror, and for a moment I failed to recognize the person gazing back at me. It was not that my physical appearance had altered, but rather like observing a stranger inhabiting my face. This profound sense of who am I truly struck me with tremendous force. Not as a philosophical inquiry, but as a visceral, terrifying experience wherein the very foundation of my identity completely dissolved. This is what I have come to understand about authentic awakening. It is not additive, it is subtractive. One does not acquire special psychological powers or achieve some permanent state of bliss. Instead, everything one believed about oneself begins falling away. Every role one has been enacting, every narrative one has been maintaining about one's identity becomes questionable. I have termed this the dissolution of the persona. The persona is the mask we present to the world, the acceptable facade we show to others and even to ourselves. When it begins to crack, when one can no longer maintain that familiar sense of self, the experience is absolutely terrifying. For what lies beneath? What remains when one is no longer the distinguished doctor, the caring father, the innovative thinker, whatever roles have been defining one's existence? For me, this dissolution phase persisted for years. Years of uncertainty about my identity from day to day, sometimes from moment to moment. I would awaken each morning and have to consciously recall what my life consisted of, who I was expected to be that day. It was like experiencing amnesia, though not regarding facts or memories, but concerning identity itself. What made this even more bewildering were the extraordinary experiences of expansion I would sometimes have, moments when I felt connected to the very fabric of existence, as though I were the universe experiencing itself subjectively. These peak experiences felt more authentic than ordinary reality. Yet I would inevitably return to confusion and disorientation, wondering if I was descending into madness. I came to understand this as an antiodromia, the movement between opposites that characterizes the individuation process. One cannot experience the light without the darkness, the expansion without the contraction, the knowing without the unknowing. It is not a linear progression towards some final enlightened state, but rather a spiral dance between consciousness and the unconscious. The most challenging aspect, and I have always been honest about this, is that most people in one's life cannot comprehend what one is experiencing. To the external world, one may appear to be suffering some form of breakdown, and perhaps one is, in a sense. But I have learned to distinguish between a breakdown and what I call a breakthrough. Sometimes one must fall apart before one can integrate in a more authentic manner. I lost colleagues during this period, individuals who could not accept that I was no longer the person they believed me to be, or perhaps I was becoming more genuinely myself, and this made them uncomfortable. Regardless, relationships based on my former persona could not survive the transformation. It was like molting, but the discarded skin included people I had assumed would remain in my life permanently. Yet, through this process, I also discovered what I have termed the authentic self. Despite being the most disorienting experience of my existence, there were moments of such profound authenticity, such genuine self-recognition that rendered all the confusion worthwhile. I remember one evening at Bowling in my stone tower, simply observing the lake at sunset, not attempting to be philosophical or achieve any particular state, merely being present. Suddenly I experienced this overwhelming sense of homecoming to myself. Not to some idealized version of myself, not to some perfected self, but to this profoundly human, flawed, authentic being who was finally accepting exactly who he was. It was not dramatic. There were no mystical visions or cosmic revelations. It was more akin to removing shoes that had been constricting for years and finally feeling one's feet touch solid ground. This profound relief of no longer needing to pretend to be someone else, even to oneself. This is what I call the emergence of the self with a capital S. Not the ego self concerned with maintaining its image and satisfying its desires, but this deeper self that connects to something transcendent while remaining uniquely individual. It embodies the paradox that characterizes all genuine psychological insights. What I realized through this process is that awakening is not about becoming someone new. It is about becoming who one has always been beneath all the conditioning and adaptation and role-playing. It resembles an archaeological excavation into one's own psyche, uncovering layer upon layer of accumulated material until one discovers this essential core that has existed all along. And this core is not some perfect, pure, enlightened being. It is beautifully, messily human. It encompasses one's shadows and light, wounds and gifts, fears and courage. I have come to understand that wholeness does not mean perfection. It means integration. It means creating space for all the different aspects of oneself rather than attempting to embody some sanitized version of what one imagines spirituality should represent. The process continues indefinitely. It is not as though one experiences this awakening and then completion arrives. One is enlightened and ready to teach others. I went through my profound psychological crisis in my 40s, and I have spent the remainder of my life integrating what I learned from that experience. I believe this makes my approach to awakening both honest and practical. I have never promised that the process would be pleasant or comfortable. I have never suggested that one would transcend human nature and become some form of psychological Superman. Instead, I have offered a framework for understanding the chaos and confusion of genuine transformation. Because this is what authentic awakening represents. It is not about achieving blissful experiences or altered states of consciousness, though these may occur. It is about bringing consciousness to what was previously unconscious. It is about accepting responsibility for one's shadow rather than projecting it onto others. It is about discovering one's unique path rather than following another's prescription for enlightenment. The remarkable thing is that once one begins integrating these shadow aspects, once one ceases fighting against parts of oneself, incredible energy becomes available. I have called this libido, not in the sexual sense, but as life force, creative energy that had been bound up in maintaining the persona and repressing the shadow. For me, this manifested as a complete transformation in how I approached my work, my relationships, my creative endeavors. Instead of calculating what the correct course of action might be, what would enhance my reputation or appear professional or successful, I began asking what wished to emerge through me, what was authentic to this particular moment, this specific situation, this version of myself. This is when life became truly fascinating, not necessarily easier, but certainly more alive, more genuine, more meaningful. There is something about living from one's authentic center that renders everything more vivid, more textured. Even difficult experiences possess a quality of reality that somehow makes them bearable. I have written extensively about what I call living one's unlived life. I believe most people traverse existence experiencing only a fraction of their potential, remaining safe within the boundaries of their persona, never truly exploring who they might become if they were not so concerned with conforming or meeting expectations. The awakening process, as I understand it, involves reclaiming those unlived aspects of oneself. It is about integrating the parts of one's personality that one learned to conceal or suppress because they were not socially acceptable or did not align with one's family values. This is why the process can be so unsettling for those around you. When one begins living more authentically, when one stops enacting familiar roles, it challenges everyone's assumptions. It grants others permission to question their own personas, and not everyone is prepared for such self-examination. But I believe this represents the most crucial work an individual can undertake, not merely for personal well-being, but for the collective. When one lives authentically, having integrated one's shadow and discovered one's genuine self, one ceases projecting unconscious material onto the world. One stops contributing to the collective unconscious patterns that generate so much suffering. In this way, individual awakening serves humanity. Every person who becomes conscious, who accepts responsibility for their own psyche, who stops living from unconscious patterns, renders the world slightly more conscious. I view this as the great work of our time, perhaps of any time. So when people inquire about what awakening truly feels like, I tell them it feels like returning home to oneself after an extraordinarily long journey. It feels like finally being able to breathe completely. It feels like the relief of no longer needing to pretend to be someone one is not. But I also tell them it feels like dying and being reborn, sometimes repeatedly. It feels like everything one believed about oneself and the world becomes inverted. It is beautiful and terrifying and profoundly ordinary simultaneously. Because ultimately, what I have come to understand is that awakening is not about becoming someone exceptional. It is about becoming fully human. And that, as it happens, is the most extraordinary achievement of all.